All right. Well, good evening, everyone, from wherever you guys are. It's really nice to have everyone here. My name is Rachel, and I am the president of PreMed CC, which is a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021. Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities with the hope of guiding the next diverse generation of physicians. We know how challenging finding mentorship can be, especially in the middle of the pandemic. And while we advertise our organization for being for community college students, our events are open and free to anyone to attend. We realize that finding mentorship and guidance in your pre-med journey can be super challenging, especially if you're a first generation student or you lack the financial resources. And so for that reason, our events are free and open to anyone. And once again, one of the best parts is that it's virtual, usually from 5 to 6:30 Pacific time on Fridays, and occasionally on Saturdays. We'll have an event tomorrow. And if you aren't able to attend our event due to school or work, we know that Fridays aren't always super convenient for everyone. All of our sessions will be uploaded on YouTube. So after you've attended the event, you can log onto our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today. And if you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate for all of your shadowing that you have done. Any students that attend all of our PreMed CC events this year will be awarded a PreMed CC Scholar Award for all your shadowing hours. And if you want to stay connected with us in our upcoming events, you guys can follow us on social media. So all of our social media accounts are at PreMed CC. All right, and at this point, Jubin, you can stop sharing your screen, and I'm going to introduce our wonderful speaker today. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Charlene Green. Dr. Green serves as Director of Admission, Outreach, Recruitment, and Retention at UCDavis School of Medicine, overseeing respective aspects of administrative matters related to admissions, student-resident diversity, and student affairs. She heads the community of practice efforts at UCDavis's National Center for the Diverse Healthcare Workforce, facilitating forums and ensuring that stakeholders and community partners achieve success in creating and implementing institutional action plans towards a diverse and inclusive learning environment. Dr. Green, we are so excited to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to PreMed CC for having me. You mentioned a lot of hats that I wear, but this talking to pre-meds is probably the most favorite thing I get to do in my job. So I'm really appreciative. Can everyone hear me okay? I feel like my internet's going out a little bit, but everyone can hear me okay? All right, great. And then just a disclaimer, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold. And so if I clear my throat a couple of times, I apologize, but hopefully it'll all work out. I'm gonna share my screen with everyone, and we'll get started. So let's talk today about kind of demystifying some of the myths for community college students. Several of my hats were mentioned. An additional thing that I get to do on top of doing research related to recruitment and retention and really workforce outcomes amongst the healthcare workforce. I also serve as an adjunct counselor and instructor at Consumers River Community College. So I do get to work with a lot of community college students. So it's great that I get to actually work with many pre-health students and then hopefully see them once they make it to medical school, whether it be UCDavis Medical School or another medical school. So it's really exciting to kind of work with the longitudinal pathway to medicine already. And then I have some great insight on kind of what community college students are going through since I work with them very closely already. So first, I wanted to touch on some of the common myths that I'll try to address today. Before I read these, I want to give the disclaimer that they're all false, and we'll talk about why throughout the presentation. So I'm just going to go through them. You should take science intense course load in community college to prove you can handle harder material. Community college requirements do not count for medical school admissions. Staying longer than 2 years. That should be than. I'm not such a grammar person. Sorry about that. You staying longer than 2 years at community college is not looked upon favorably. Medical schools do not accept students that started at community college. Getting a C in a core science or prerequisite course for medical school automatically disqualifies you for medical school admissions. taking the MCAT to see how you do is a good way to figure out what you need to work on. You have to graduate from a UC school, undergrad campus, to be admitted to a UC medical school. You need to be a science major to go to medical school. So let's dive into some of these myths. So first, I want to acknowledge that there's no one way to get to the final destination. Everyone's journey looks different. So throughout the presentation, I want you to remember that you should be on your own timeline and your own path, and don't worry about what others are doing and comparing yourself to where you should be in this process. Everyone's path belongs to themselves. So pay gratitude to the journey that you've been through, because that's going to help you actually later on in your application. And then a little bit about my journey. I'm a community college graduate. I attended American River College. I'm from the south side of Stockton. Shout out to the 209 folks. And I actually started off at Sac State, was actually dismissed for doing really poorly academically. And I went to American River College and met this amazing counselor, Dr. Judy Mays, who really showed me what I was capable of, helped me with a path and a career path that would work for me. I was eventually able to graduate from American River College, went back to Sac State, and really thought my journey in education was done, like accomplished a bachelor's degree, great, but was really encouraged by her to continue on and pursue my master's. And she's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about higher education now. And this is a little article they did in the American River Alumni Magazine. So just to show that your mentors can have such an impact on your trajectory and your journey. And even after my master's, I actually went on to complete a doctorate degree, which I just finished in June. So someone who literally is from South Stockton, never thought I would even complete college, to have a doctorate degree, and then for people to elevate me in a school of medicine and me be able to be a decision maker and have a seat at the table has been a really incredible journey for me. So again, no one's journey looks the same. I certainly didn't say in high school, I want to build doctors for a living. So keep that in mind through your journey. Things can happen in unexpected ways. So I say this is a long game. I put Monopoly here because my kids love Monopoly and I dread it because that's a really long game. But surprise, you have selected a lifelong learning profession. You actually will never stop learning in medicine, and you shouldn't. You will never stop taking exams. You actually, even when you're board certified, you have to retake your board certification every 10 years. So this really is a lifelong learning profession that you've selected. And it will take a while, and that's okay. Accept it. It is okay that it will take a while, because again, you're going to be really building a learning foundation for yourself. And it's part of your professional responsibility in the field of medicine to continue learning, to continue to seek knowledge, and continue to stay abreast of things in your field. So what's important is doing well and gaining and retaining knowledge. It's much more important than finishing really quickly. You really want to make sure you understand the fundamentals and the foundation of each concept, because they're going to need to carry you in the next level of your education throughout this process. It's not uncommon for STEM majors to spend more than 2 years at community college. It's actually very common. And on the next slide, I'll give you some examples of that. And there's really a benefit of going to community college. When you're in these environments, there's typically smaller classrooms. You have much more access to people, number one, but other support entities that are probably and likely more impacted at a university level, such as counseling, wellness, EOP and EOPS, Moja, MESA, tutoring, pre-med support, pre-health support, things like that. And also a longer stay at community college will be cheaper than trying to hurry up and transfer and then staying at the university level longer for 3 or 4 years. It's more expensive to attend classes at the university level. So here's, again, emphasis on examples of math and science needed for certain STEM pattern transfers. So over here, I have highlighted medicine and vet. So again, examples. So as you can see, it's like 7 semesters minimum likely if you're starting out at Trig. And a lot of community college students don't start out. I certainly didn't start out at Trig, and many students I work with don't start out at Trig. So there's typically a couple of classes that need to happen in math, particularly before you can get to Trig. If you didn't take chemistry with lab in high school, then you'll have to take a beginning chemistry course before you can take the general chemistry course that you're going to need if you're transferring as a STEM major, particularly for many pre-medical students, they transfer into a science or biological sciences major. So this is just an example of kind of the road it takes. So, 2 semesters or 3 semesters could be a year for you if you're also attending summer school classes. So you're already talking at a minimum if you're attending summer classes, right? You can't do technically a full load in summer, like there's an allotment on units in the summer. So you're really looking at already 2.5 to 3 years in community college before you transfer. And that's okay. Again, it is okay to spend more than 2 years at community college. This is not frowned upon by medical schools. I'm constantly telling pre-health and pre-med students, I would rather you take a lot longer at community college, get a strong foundation, learn what you need to learn, and especially get A's and B's in these core courses, because they're really going to help you as you go to the more advanced science courses and help you prepare for the first year of medical school. So another thing I like to include is please don't do this process alone. One of the things that I see a lot, particularly in even working with community colleges, people aren't taking the right classes, particularly math and science courses, and you really want to make sure you're taking the right classes. And advisors and counselors are there to help you with that. So I really advise students to see advisors and academic counselors minimum once a semester, minimum. So you should be seeing them right before it's time to pick your classes for the following semester. You should be scheduling appointments to see your advisors and your counselors to pick your next course load, and really plan out your whole plan until you're ready to transfer. And that plan might change, and that's okay. But every semester you should be meeting with a counselor to make sure, are you still on track? Did you need to retake something? Or maybe you changed your mind about the order you wanted to do things, and you want to make sure that's okay. Because a lot of these classes are prereqs to prereqs to prereqs and have to go in a certain sequence and order. So please rely on the folks that are there to serve you and help you figure out what that schedule should look like. So in general, before you transfer, you're going to have a combination of your general education courses plus your major transfer requirements. So for instance, many schools require, if you're transferring as a biological science major, that you do a full bio series, a full general chemistry series, an organic chemistry series, a calculus series, and physics. So again, all of those things have to go in a certain order, and that's on top of your general education requirements. So you want to check your general education requirements, your major transfer requirements, and if you're going to complete the associate's degree, you want to make sure you're in line with all of those requirements with your counselors. And also, you don't have to get an associate's degree. So associates, the AA is Associates of Arts, the AS is Associates of Science degree. You don't have to get one in order to transfer, but most STEM students who end up transferring into a science major end up getting one as they complete their transfer requirements anyway. So it just kind of comes with it. So I typically tell people, when you're in any major that requires a ton of classes for you to transfer, focus on the transfer, the associate's degree will come. Also, most major transfer requirements will be very similar with a few differences here and there, depending on the program or school that you want to transfer to. So for example, let's say you want to transfer to the schools you're interested in are UC Irvine and CSU Fresno State, right? So by at least your 3rd semester in community college, I would say 3rd or 4th if you're a STEM major, try to start researching and narrowing your top schools, because you really want to make sure that you're completing the necessary requirements. And please utilize your counselors and advisors to help you with that. Another great tool that many counselors use, and it's also open to the public so students can access it too, is assist.org. You plug in your community college, you plug in the school you're interested in transferring to, you plug in your major, and it tells you what courses you need in addition to your general education requirements that you need in order to transfer to a certain school in that major. So again, you want to make sure you're on the right general education track as well. So there's typically, California community colleges follow 2 general education tracks. One is called the CSU breadth for the California State University breadth. And that will take you to basically 23 CSU schools. So these are the GE course pattern that you need to follow in order to transfer to a CSU school. The other pattern is IGETC breadth. So that takes you to CSU schools as well, but in addition to the 9 UC schools, in-state schools, out-of-state schools, public and private schools, including HBCUs. So the I GETC one, in essence, is a little bit more broad. There's less options, but it takes you more places. The CSU breadth has a lot more class options in each category, but only takes you to CSU schools. So the question about, do you need to go to a UC school to transfer or to get accepted to a UC medical school? The answer is no. We actually actively seek CSU and HBCU students for medical schools because we find that those systems are actually more accessible for the students we're looking for at UCDavis particularly. So there's lots of targeted outreach towards these types of schools that have students and learners from different backgrounds, because we're really looking to build students who can relate to patient populations that currently need more service from physicians or need more representation from physicians. So we find there's a rich diversity amongst CSU schools and HBCU schools as well. Many of our students do come from UC schools, and I think there are a lot of myths around that as far as, I would say, pre-health and pre-medical support within these systems. A lot of the CSU schools, not all, and I think a lot of them are starting to evolve, but a lot of the CSU schools, their advising lives kind of in their science departments. So maybe biology, like faculty have really taken it on, but UC schools seems to be doing a better job with having like specific health professions advising. So I see CSU schools getting on board with this model more now, to where there's a hub where if you're interested in any health professions, they kind of have experts in that area. And so we're hoping to see an increase of CSU applicants as well. So that is a myth that you have to go to a UC medical school. Definitely also seek out students from other public school systems. Okay, so a lot of pre-med students ask me, what should I major in? So this can get complicated. So number one, I tell people major in what you're interested in. Number one, deciding if you want to do medicine or a healthcare field should be your choice. You have to care about it, be engaged with it, and be passionate, because as you can see, it's a really long journey. So you want to make sure you're really invested in yourself and this process. So you don't have to be a science major to go to medical school. I have a couple of situations that come to mind. I've had students who they were really interested in dance, or they were interested in other non-science majors. They completed their bachelor's degree in whatever that other subject was. And then they did like a post-bac program, or they call it a do-it-yourself post-bac program. So there's like a formal post-bac program where you actually go and take a year of science intense course load. And it's for people who maybe weren't science majors, people who are career changers, or maybe people who need academic enhancement, meaning they didn't do so well in undergrad, and so they need to like boost their GPA and showcase they can take science intense course load. So those are kind of some examples of how you could do your prerequisites and your requirements for medical school after you've completed your bachelor's degree. Some folks also major in something else and then stretch out their undergrad time in order to take their prereqs for medical school, which we'll talk about in a second. So those are options. I have some students who have been student athletes, and if you have been a college athlete, or if you are a college athlete, you know there's a lot of time involved with that. And so it's really hard, not to say that folks can't do it, but when you are in community college and even undergrad, these science grades mean a lot when you're getting ready to apply for medical school. It's really, really hard to fix grades that don't showcase that you can handle the academic rigor of medicine. So for instance, having lots of C's become really, really challenging because they affect your GPA so heavily. So I've seen a lot of college athletes major in something else and then do what I suggested before, which is maybe take your prereqs afterwards at the community college, extending your time in undergrad at the end of your college career, or also doing like a post-bac program. So English, philosophy, history, music majors actually have higher acceptances than chem and bio, because most people that apply for medical school are chem and bio majors. So of course, these non-science majors, there are fewer that apply. So that's probably why they have a higher acceptance rate. So I'm by far not saying go be another major, because you'll definitely have a better chance of getting in. Not what I'm saying, just that's a statistic. So it may take longer to graduate. to get all the prereqs done as well. So think about that too. You may be spending longer on the back end, which if you remember from a few slides ago, that can mean you're spending more money after you transfer to your 4-year if you're extending your stay. So think about that too. So here are the advantages of being a science-related major. Number one, pre-med recs are part of the degree requirements. So by the time you finish undergrad, you'll have your prerequisite requirements for medical school typically completed. Your science GPA is padded with more science classes. So I put this can also be a negative. It is a positive because if you're doing what I said from the beginning, which was really working to get a strong foundation in science, right? And getting good grades in science, like mostly A's, some B's are fine, a couple C's here, there, fine. But really trying to work hard to understand the concepts of science, and you overall do really well, this is great because then you're gonna have more good grades or more classes contributing to a GPA, right? Which is an average of grades, but it can also be a negative because if you didn't do so hot and you need to boost your BCPM, then that can be a challenge because now you have so many classes, even if you start to just get A's later on in your academic career, it's really hard to move that needle on what your overall BCPM GPA is. So let me explain BCPM a little bit more. So there are lots of GPAs medical schools get to see once you apply. They see your undergrad GPA, that's any undergrad coursework you've taken. So community college, once you transfer to a 4-year university, and also your post-grad program, if it is undergrad coursework, it will count in your total undergrad GPA. If it's graduate coursework, it will actually count as a separate GPA that's delivered to the school. Because some people also do what's called special master's program, which is also very similar to a postbac in the fact that it is science intense coursework. So they get your full undergrad GPA, they get just a GPA of your BCPM. So they get just your bio, chem, physics, and math grade, like GPA altogether. They get your all other GPA, which is everything that's not science related. And as I mentioned, they get your graduate GPA. So if you've done a master's degree or any grad work, they get all these separate GPAs. So I put on the side, like what counts in the BCPM, just so you can see, but this is also on the AAMC website. If you just type in BCPM, AAMC, AAMC, then you can see like the full list of the other categories that don't fall in the BCPM categories. So another advantage of being a science-related major, it really does help you better prepare for the first year of medical school. A lot of these foundational courses are super helpful, particularly like anatomy, physiology, things like that. Very helpful for your first year of medical school. And as you get towards the end of your science major, like the last year and a half before graduating, typically it is mostly science classes. So again, you're practicing and getting in the habit of taking science intense course loads and being able to manage what that looks like. That's pretty much what med school is science classes pretty much all day, studying a lot in the evening, and then taking exams, but also retaining the information because you'll need to, again, apply those things to the next step. So this is just a side note. One of the myths on there was, okay, if I get a C in one of these core prerequisite classes or core science classes, is that the end for me? Will medical schools no longer consider me? So no, not necessarily, that's not true. So we've had students get in with C's before. It's not the end all be all. We're really looking at you holistically. So what holistically means is that we're looking at everything about your grades. We're looking at the coursework that you took together. We're looking at what we call grade trends. So from, your first year of school all the way to your end, all the way to the end, were you trending up? Did you increase? Did you do better? A lot of times, let's say you are a transfer student and you transferred and maybe you had a dip in your GPA. Okay, maybe that was that person adjusting from being in a smaller community college campus to adjusting to a 4-year university, trying to find their resources, their bearings, their community, getting adjusted. So those are all things that you can definitely talk about in your application, which we'll get to a little bit later. But no, a C is not the end all be all. The goal is what you're trying to do is showcase you can handle the academic rigor of medicine. That's the ultimate goal. And you're going to do that with a combination of things: your grades, your academic history, the coursework you decided to take, and also your MCAT, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But the important thing that you should know is you do have to include all attempted courses on your med school application. So if, let's say, you failed a class and you retook it, you actually still have to include that on your med school application. If you think you're not doing well in the class and you get a W, you have to include that on your medical school application. And W's aren't the end of the world. What we don't want to see in medical school applications is a pattern. There's two types of folks where it's like, okay, I feel like I'm not passing, so I'm just going to keep getting a W until I can pass it, so that you have all these W's on your record. That doesn't look too good. Again, 1, 2, 3, maybe fine, spread out. But when you have this repeated behavior of W, then that doesn't look great. The other type of profile that I see is a student who actually is really high achieving and high performing, and they're scared to get a B or scared to get 1C. And so they'll keep getting a W because they are striving for that A, and they don't want to stop until they get that A because they're striving for perfection. Well, number one, that means that you're taking more time, right? A B is okay. A B is not the end of the world. A couple of C's is not the end of the world. So again, look at your whole package before you make a decision, and utilize your advisors and your counselors before you drop a class, before you decide you can't do it, before you decide you want to start all the way over. Talk to a counselor and advisor about your whole package. That's what we're looking at, not just that one class, your whole package, to see if it makes sense for you to drop it and take the W, or should you take the grade you think you're going to get in the class and move on with your series because you have pretty good command of the content. So again, work with folks who do this all the time. They're there to help and advise you. Okay, so let's talk about what you should be focusing on now. This is a recap of some things I've talked about. But number one, build knowledge foundation. Gain understanding and foundational concepts is like incredibly important. Again, it's going to help you for the next stage, for the next stage, for the next stage of this journey. Math and science are things you have to practice. Like, you actually have to do the homework, and because that's how you learn it. That is literally how you practice the skills that you're going to need to move on to the next level. And again, you're going to continue to do this. Study skills. So with academic loads that are very rigorous, like how you process information is important. And think about what your end goal is. Like, you're going to be taking care of patients. So it's really important that you have good study skills, because you're not only going to just need to learn this and take the exam and pass a course, you're actually going to need to apply it in a clinical setting. You're going to apply it to internships and future careers. So you need to be able to retain the knowledge so that way you can apply it appropriately. So what can you do now? So what can you do before and after transfer, right? So number one, understand your academic record and plan your timeline for your application. And that's going to take more than this talk today. It really is going to take you really connecting with groups like this. And hearing this information over and over again is the most beneficial thing you can do. There's so many elements to the application and the process. So you really need to make sure you are getting engaged with the language that admissions officers and admissions committees use, understanding what health disparities are, understanding how you're going to create your narrative for your application. The more you hear these talks, the more helpful it'll be when you are ready to apply. Because if you just say, okay, I'm ready to apply, and you look at the application, you're immediately going to be overwhelmed. So many pieces. So the more you can get engaged with talks like this, organizations like this, the better off you'll be when it's time to really sit down and apply, to talk to your advisor about next steps. So make sure you understand your academic record and plan your timeline for your application. Again, work with your advisors and counselors on this. You can do extracurricular activities. So shadowing a healthcare provider, doing research, again, athletics, clubs, leadership skills, and related employment like scribe, EMT. So again, what makes your journey to medicine important is the piece that's important to you. So if being a college athlete is important to you and helping drive you towards medicine, think about the things that you do and how it's going to translate to a great physician, right? An athlete, a classic pianist, right? Think about the things that you learn from those situations and those activities. So discipline, time management, dedication, working collaboratively on a team. Think about the skills you learn from these different activities. How do you get opportunities? Pre-health conferences, your instructors, talk to them, let them know you're a pre-med student and you're interested. If they have connections into that field, please let you know. Pre-health advising offices, pre-med and STEM student groups, find mentors, build support networks. I've named a couple here. Of course, PreMed CC, Me Mentor is another great one. Physician Medical Forum is out of the Bay Area. It's for underrepresented minorities as well. Latino Medical Student Association and the Student National Medical Association. They all have pre-med groups that are focused on particularly those who are underserved or underrepresented in medicine. Also look for summer opportunities to do research, enrichment, pathway programs, and things like that. So those are things that you can be doing now. Okay, so now that I've overwhelmed you with all the long road it takes to get to medicine, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you a little bit about why you need to face this kind of long journey, and talk to you a little bit about why you're needed in healthcare. So if you look at this graph, the 95817 is our Oak Park community in Sacramento, and that's where our UCDavis hospital is located and our medical school is located. Just 17 minutes away is 95616, which is actually Davis, California, and that's where our undergrad campus is. And so why you're needed in healthcare is this very depiction. Just 17 minutes away, your life expectancy is 10 years less. So there's some health disparities and inequities going on in our local community, even with the hospital located right there, that is causing us to have health disparities and challenges within the community. So we're really interested in building not just physicians, but physician leaders who want to help address these inequities. So not only are we talking about why community college students are important for medicine, but we're actually using evidence to prove this. So again, I say you will serve the communities in areas of physician shortages. You will serve communities who need a physician workforce that is reflective of themselves. So it's not just something that I'm saying, this is something that is data driven and that's proven and that medical schools are looking at across the country. So it's absolutely not a red flag if someone started off at community college. It doesn't count negatively against your application. Even those who did their prereqs after undergraduate, finishing undergraduate at community college, those things are not counted negatively. We're looking at you as a whole person, and metrics is just one piece of the puzzle. We're looking at everything else you bring to medicine. We're looking at your perseverance. We're looking at your relatability to communities that need them most. We're looking at your life experience, your emotional intelligence. We're interested in other things, other than just being like super smart. Yes, you need to be focused and dedicated to do medicine. You need to handle a certain level of academic rigor. And I know Dr. Nikkei, you all have heard from her previously, and she definitely reiterates the same thing where it's like, grades won't get you into medical school, but they can keep you out. So grades are important, but there's other stuff that we also value that are equally as important when we talk about holistic admissions and how we're really selecting physicians to really carry the future of healthcare. So again, representation matters. If you're serving someone who you share identity with, it is statistically proven that you're going to have a connection with them, you're going to serve better, you're going to serve them better, and you're going to make sure that you have what they need. So part of us trying to bolster the workforce is to bring these diverse views. And then also, if I have colleagues who are different from me, then I learn from them. So this is why representation is so important, not just with the patients, but the peers that you will learn with. I just want to reiterate that and make sure people heard me when I said that your presence in medical school and medical education actually will make your peers better, make them better providers, because they're also being able to connect with you, your differences, understand different traditions, cultures, religions. That diversity and that richness is something that you can't always learn in the book. You learn it by getting to know other human beings, right? Diverse perspectives. And that's something that you will bring to the field of medicine. So at UCDavis School of Medicine, we have this concept of socially accountable admission. So we're really focused on workforce needs as our main strategy and priority in recruitment. And this is a type of strategy that needs buy-in and support at the very top levels of leadership. So everyone in the institution has to be committed to this in order for this to actually work and come to fruition. So lots of resources and time are put into producing these outcomes. So what is socially accountable admissions? So it's really the obligation for a school to direct their education, research, service activities towards addressing the priority of health concerns with the community in the region that they want to serve, right? So it's really building into the curriculum, working in the community. So our students actually have programs in which they're able to, if you're from a rural community, if you're from an urban underserved area, you get to learn things in the classroom, but we have clinical rotations in those communities, so you can learn where you want to serve. That's a really important core part of our curriculum. Social accountability has to be an institutional priority. Like I said, it has to come from the top, and it's not just the education, but research, clinical care, how we're measuring our outcomes and how we're measuring our effectiveness. And our strategy is really to select students from these communities with the greatest need, because the hope is that we'll be able to work with you, enhance your knowledge of your own community, help you train within your community, and then you'll go back and serve those communities. So here's kind of in general, our recruitment and selection strategy. So our mission, diversity is in our mission off the top. Like that is one of the most important pieces of our mission statement, is that we want to build a diverse healthcare workforce that meets the needs of our region. So we're really focused on Northern California and also California in general. So we have mission scholarships that are grant funded, and we have lots of mission focused pathway programs, which I'll talk about in a second. How we review students, I mentioned that we're looking at you in a holistic manner. And what that stands for, the EAM, is experiences, attributes, and metrics. So we're looking at all these things because we don't just care about your GPA and MCAT, we really care about your experiences. Do you have experiences that are adjacent to primary care and community service? Do you have the attributes we're looking for? I mentioned resilience, being from a rural area, coming from an underserved community. And then something unique at UCDavis, we actually have a socioeconomic disadvantage score. It's actually a metric score that places value on somebody's background, and we incorporate that into our evaluation. Our interviews, we utilize the MMI style interview, multiple mini interview, and it's basically kind of like speed dating and reality TV. So you get all of these different interactions. The interviewers have not read your application. They ask you a question. You get to talk about a specific scenario or a prompt, and they only judge you based on that specific scenario or prompt. And then you meet with 10 people. So we're really looking at your average score. And that's not meant to pull out anything about medical knowledge. It's meant to pull out, are you a great communicator? Do you take feedback well? Do you understand diverse perspectives? And we've done lots of studies on our interview process, helping to be a better predictor of clinical performance. And for our medical school, clinical performance happens in the third year of medical school. So when we use the MMI, it's a better predictor of the type of bedside manner you'll have with patients, the compassion you'll have for patients, your maturity, and your, again, emotional intelligence when you're on the clinical rotation. So just to touch briefly on some of our workforce programs, our HPC program is a 3-year program for people who absolutely know they want to do primary care. Our school is actually we're number 11 in primary care currently, which equates to about 50% of our students end up going into a primary care field, which is family medicine, internal medicine. Sometimes OBGYN is counted in that category, pediatrics and emergency. So HPC is actually a 3-year accelerated program, so it actually gets people out faster into the workforce because we need primary care physicians so badly, particularly in physician shortage areas. Our Rural Prime program is exactly what it sounds like. It's a traditional 4-year program, but you get special curriculum that's focused on caring for rural communities. Our Reach Prime is actually focused on San Joaquin Valley, so it's actually the northern San Joaquin Valley, so Modesto, Merced, Galt, Stockton. And it's really focused on and centralized around that area. So there are clinical experiences in that area. And our Teach MS program is focused on urban underserved populations. Again, all of these programs are intentionally recruited to focus on students who really have a mission focus. And so here's kind of the outcomes of our residency outcomes for people involved in these programs over the past decade. So if you look at primary care in the usual manner of family medicine, internal medicine, and pediatrics, about 2/3 of our students go into a primary care field. As I mentioned, that's a huge shortage area, particularly in California. And you can see that 40% have chosen primary care specialties, and it's 2/3 the national rate. Apart from other residencies, tend to be areas of workforce needs as well, like OBGYNs, general surgeons. There's a huge need for that as well. So we're not just trying to build primary care physicians. We want you to become physicians, number one, but we do have workforce programs that are focused on filling the intense needs of primary care. Okay, so now that I've like dumped a whole bunch of fun data on you, I hope that the data I've shared really convinces you that it's not just me who thinks we need you, but the data is showing that there's evidence that we really need learners just like yourself who come from where you come from. So let's switch gears to just general info and tips. So number one, I strongly encourage you to build your network now. And your mentors don't always have to be people who look like you or share identity with you. So keep that in mind. I think be open to anyone who is willing to help. In the same vein, I would also say be okay with no's and no responses. I talked to a lot of pre-med students who are like, I've reached out to this person for research. I reached out to this person for such and such experience. Haven't heard anything back. You know, it's okay to nudge a couple times, but at some point, every person's not going to say yes to you. If you reach out to 10 people and get like 3 responses, you're doing a good job. Folks are busy. Remember, everyone's human. Assume good intentions. Assume that, you know, even though people want to help, they may not have the capacity, and keep going. You can't let that deter you, distract you, or discourage you from moving forward. Keep going until you find a yes, okay? And don't take it personal. Another really great tip I always tell folks is keep your documentation of all of your activities or your application, like all of the community service things you do, leadership, being parts of clubs, all the activities you do. Just create a little Google Doc for yourself where you can document, you know, when you did it, what it was, 1 or 2 bullet points of what it is. This will really help you when you go to do a resume, and also when you go to do your application. You can always taper things down and categorize and prioritize what are the most important and impactful things. But it's going to be really hard when you go to apply to medical school and you're trying to think about what you did, you know, your second year of community college, and you did a bunch of things. So just keep a running list of the things that you're doing. When you get to the application piece, tell a story with your whole application. Don't leave us guessing who you are. There's kind of like a sweet spot with being authentic and vulnerable within your story. And remember, the best part of your story is you. And I would say the way you put things out there, if you might be worried about some certain things that are part of your story, but you feel like they're important to you, have people who review applications look at your whole entire package. So that's counselors and pre-health advisors, maybe even if you know people who are already in medical school, have them look at your whole package to see, number one, does your whole application make sense? You know, is this too much information here? Or maybe this is not appropriate to share, or maybe, hey, if you reword it like this, then it sounds good. You're going to go through several revisions of what your application looks like, and that's okay. So briefly, I think y'all have touched on this maybe with other presentations, but I just want to touch on the application process. So number one, the primary application. So the primary application, most things within the medical education world lives with AAMC. You'll hear that term a lot, and it stands for Association of American Medical Colleges. From AAMC, the AMCAS application, or the American Medical College Application Service, they're the ones who basically hold your primary application. So it's a one application that you would route to multiple schools. In that application, you'll have biographical info, so that's like your legal residence, how you identify as race and gender, first gen, the languages you speak, things like that. It'll have all of your coursework. Remember I said all of your coursework, including F's and W's, also go in your application. Your MCAT, which is the medical college admissions test. So this is kind of like the GRE for medical school, but it's basically a test that's going to showcase science and other capabilities that you have. And that's a really important test as well that is incorporated into your overall academic package and how you're evaluated on can you do medical school or not, basically. Your work and activities, you get to put up to 15 things. Your letters of recommendation, start connecting with people now. Remember I said build your network now. So if you're really vibing with like a science professor, or let's say you're working in the healthcare field or even like a community service area, and you're connected to them, make sure you're keeping in touch with these people, even after you go on to other classes and coursework or other jobs. Just make sure, number one, you make it known that you are a pre-medical student. And then also keep in touch with them, like, hey, I know I took your, general chemistry 1 class last semester. I'm in Chem 2 now. I'm doing really well. I really want to thank you for the extra time you took to explain blah, blah, blah to me, because that's really helping me in this second. So just find a way to connect with them at least once a semester. So when you are at the stage where you need to ask for a letter of recommendation, they will, number one, will remember who you are. They can write you a good letter, and they will be a spokesperson for you, right? That's what you want. That's what you're going for. But you definitely don't want to ask someone to write you a letter and they hardly remember you. So that's important. Keep those relationships going. And then your personal statement, which I'll dive into my personal statement starter package in a minute, just to get you to start thinking about it. So once your primary applications go in, some schools send secondary applications to all students that apply to their school. Our school doesn't do that. We send secondary applications to about half of the people who apply to our school. So we get about 7,500 applications, maybe about 3,500 to 4,000 folks get secondary applications. And that's your opportunity to say more about yourself. We ask some school-specific mission-focused questions, some essay questions, small essays, and you're able to say more about yourself. And then your application is routed to people who will screen you for interviews and things like that. Once you get to the interview stage, it's typically going to be traditional, or like ours, the multiple mini interview. The most important part is, again, you want to be prepared, but you also really want to make sure you're yourself and authentic, right? Once you get to the interview stage, schools are really interested in learning more about you and how you would fit into their school and their mission. After your interview, your whole application, including your interview notes, typically goes to a committee or a series of committees for final review and decision. So here are the UCDavis pre-med requirements, the MCAT within 36 months of applying. This is really important. Hear me when I say do not take the MCAT just to see how you do. I always say don't take the MCAT for funsies, because we do see every single attempt, and you don't want to have a, number one, it's an expensive test. That's number one. It's like, I think about $320 right now. So it's expensive, and it's like
$360.
$360. Oh God, the price went up. Oh my goodness gracious. Thank you for the correction. It's $360 now, because just last year it was $320 because I had a scholarship where I paid for a couple of MCATs. So apparently it's up now. Anyway, I have a whole presentation about how expensive applying to medical school is another day, but very expensive to apply. It's like a marathon. When you're preparing for the MCAT, it's like you're preparing your mind, like the content, but also strategy, but also your body. Like physically, it is a long test. So you don't want to take the MCATs for funsies. Just trust me on that. So within 36 months of applying, which is 3 years, especially during the pandemic, schools have been a little bit more flexible with this 36 months. So oftentimes people have just asked for an exception because their MCAT has expired, because maybe they weren't able to apply because of the pandemic.
So sorry, just one correction. It's $360, $320 to take it, $360, and you get the extra practice exam. So
Gotcha. Okay, so the test itself is still $320. I was like, wow, that went up really quick because I just paid for a couple. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so the other requirement, so don't pay attention to the 3 years. Part of the 3 years is like our bylaws, but I can tell you 100% of people who have got accepted to our school have a bachelor's degree, but there's always that room for that one exception of a genius who just didn't want to finish undergrad and really wants to come to medical school before they finish their bachelor's degree. But I can tell you 100% of our matriculants, those who get into our medical school, have a bachelor's degree, and not necessarily a science bachelor's degree, but a bachelor's degree. And then here's our college level courses. And these can actually all be taken at community college again. So people sometimes take them post-undergrad, but we require 1 year of bio. Most people do the bio series. Anatomy physiology is just super helpful. So I really recommend if folks can do that, because you have anatomy your first year of medical school. It's really helpful. General chemistry a year. You can do organic chemistry. We require a year of organic chemistry, but if you don't do organic chem, we allow biochem. Biochem is just great anyway, just in full transparency. If you can do both organic chem and biochem, it's really helpful. But our official requirement is one or the other, and then 1 year of physics. So those are our prereqs. So this is just something to get you starting to think about the future. So as you build your identity and your narrative towards medicine, this is what I call personal statement starter pack. By no means all the content you need, but it's just like when you're sitting down and you want to get started, like, what do I write? When did you know you wanted to do medicine? Like, since you were 4, you had this really awesome experience and you were able to see some disparities in the community. You had a family member with a health issue and you know, things didn't go right in the healthcare system, or maybe things did go right and you really admired the physician that worked with your grandmother and you really inspired you to be like that person, whatever. When did you know you wanted to do medicine? What have you done within your scope as a pre-medical student to foster and grow this passion? So if you care about women's health, I better see some activities on your application that said, I worked in a women's health clinic, I worked at a women's shelter, I worked helping women find jobs in a workforce development nonprofit, something with women, right? Make it make sense. Your whole application has to tell a story. And then what will you contribute or do? What will you contribute to the field of medicine, or what will you do? Do you want to be a physician scientist and find a cure for some illness? Do you want to work with underserved folks? Do you want to do global medicine and help, you know, people in the country your family's from have eye surgeries? I have a student who did that. So it's like, what do you want to do in the field of medicine? So just things to think about as you start to like pick activities and things that's going to help you build your identity towards a physician. Okay, so let's see, what did we miss? So you should take science intense course load in a community college to prove you can handle harder material. Again, I'd rather you take longer than try to pack a whole bunch in and hope you do really well. I'd rather you take a little longer, break it up so you can really, number one, focus, get good grades, but really understand the content for the next level. Community college requirements do not count towards medical school admissions. We talked about this, absolutely do. We take prereqs. Either you did them before you transferred or you're doing them a post-undergrad to fulfill prerequisite requirements. Staying longer than 2 years at community college is not looked upon favorably, no problem. Again, I'd rather you take longer in community college, it's cheaper, and then transfer and do what and finish out your bachelor's degree before applying. Medical school does not accept students that start at community college. We talked about that. We absolutely do. We are looking for you. Getting a C in core science or prerequisite coursework automatically disqualifies you for medical school admission. We talked about this, absolutely does not. We're looking at your whole package. So don't let a 1 or 2 C's or a few C's discount you. Talk with someone who does this to really assess your academic package. And it's never the end all be all. It's never, okay, you have 5 C's, that's it, it's over. No, the question should be, what's next? What can I do so I can reach that goal? If you really care about this, it may take a little longer, but you will get there. We talked about do not take the MCAT for funsies. Everyone knows that. And then you have to graduate from a UC school. We talked about this.
But take a lot of practice exams.
Yes, take a lot. Well, these folks are, I'm assuming y'all are kind of far from MCAT, so I hate to overwhelm people, but yes, you should, there actually is like, you should be scoring well, like at least over 500 on your practice exams before you get to the big show, I say. So you want to take lots of practice exams, and there's lots of scholarships. So when y'all are ready to take MCAT, reach out to me because we do have scholarships at UCDavis School of Medicine. Of course, they're limited, but I can definitely direct you to other areas where you can get MCAT prep. Because that's another thing is some people don't, sometimes when you self-study, you are not studying the correct way or the right way, either for your learning style or the right content. So let folks who do this help you prepare for the MCAT. And yes, practice exam, like you should never go into this without taking a practice exam in agreement. Let's see, you need to be a science major to go to medical school. We talked about that, you do not need. So I'm hoping to get some questions. What did I miss that folks still want to know about myths about being a community college student?
Hi, Dr. Green. We have one question where a student was wondering if COVID affected the way that medical schools look at grades.
Yes. So a couple things. So I think, number one, the medical education community, just like COVID was really challenging for you all, I can tell you, we definitely felt it. Even for current medical students on our current administration, like literally moving medical school online was a huge undertaking. When it comes to the pre-med world, I can tell you across the nation, I'm on so many national work groups for admissions in medical school. We definitely were really trying to find ways to put the applicant first, be as flexible as possible with deadlines. Throughout the pandemic, we've taken later MCATs. We've really worked to be flexible again with separate deadlines, deadline extensions. Our UCDavis School of Medicine actually did later interviews. We actually started our whole cycle later last year. So normally our interviews would start in August. We didn't even start until October last year. So I think for grades, number one, and we also have this posted on our website, you were allowed to get an interview without an MCAT score. You couldn't get an offer without an MCAT score, but you were allowed to be reviewed if you choose to, and got an interview without an MCAT score. We completely understand that there are pass-fail grades. Now, that gets challenging, right? Because it depends, right? If we're looking at your whole package and like, let's say you had really great grades before the pandemic, sure, no problem. But some people really needed those like later grades, right? Because they're a better student now, they're more focused, they know where the resources are. And so the pass-fail grades, they didn't hurt you, but they didn't help you if you needed it either. So that's another challenge with the pass-fail grade. So that part, we prefer you to have in-person science courses with labs, but we know that couldn't happen. So there were lots of things like this that we were definitely providing a lot of actual training to our admissions committee members to help them understand that students were trying to navigate within their own challenges of navigating through the pandemic, MCAT testing and traveling, and it was still in person, and having to cancel or reschedule because you were exposed to COVID or lots of things. So I think we try to be as understanding as possible. So there was lots of exceptions made. So I think when in doubt, contact the schools that you're applying to. And I think even after the pandemic is over, let them tell you no. Don't tell yourself no, or like it's over for me, I'm out because something happened. You want to make sure you are checking with the school to see what accommodations they can make for you if you have certain challenges and barriers throughout this process.
Thank you. That was really helpful. We're also wondering if students who attended community colleges would be considered non-traditional applicants.
No, so by definition, non-traditional applicants are those who don't go into medical school directly after undergrad. So that's a great question in itself, how we look at non-traditional applicants. I think it varies by school, but for us, we actually have a higher number of non-traditional applicants, to be honest with you. So people who take a little longer to get medical school. So our average age of student is like 25, 26, where when you're out of undergrad, you're typically like 21, 22. So we actually have a little bit older student. Our oldest student, I say over the last 5 years, we have an incoming student that's 52 years old. So we're really looking at people holistically, like what do you bring to the table? We really don't care about age or how long you took to get here. What do you bring to the table and where you're in line with our mission? So we have a huge range of aged applicants, if you will, and different ranging experiences at UCDavis School of Medicine.
So again, this is another question that was typed. So I want, if you can repeat this again, does it matter if you take your prereqs at community college?
No, it does not matter if you take your prereqs at community college. Again, we're looking at you holistically. So it's like, what are the grades? Was it, depending on like, when was it? Was it before you transferred? Is it at post-grad? We're looking at grade trends. Did you trend up? So again, when people ask me like, what's a good GPA, or what's, a good grade for XYZ class, or if I got 1C here, does that matter? I always say it depends, because we're looking at your whole package, not just one element about you.
And tying into grades, some students were wondering if medical schools are going to look at their community college GPA and their post-transfer GPA separately, or if they're combined into a cumulative GPA.
Yeah, so when we look at your grades, they're combined under undergrad, that's one, but then it also shows it by freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So it shows 4 years of undergrad years, and that's based on units. So this unit to unit is counted as freshman, this unit to this unit is counted as sophomore, and then this unit to this unit is counted as junior status. So you might have in your junior status, right, some classes from community college and some classes from your whatever school you transferred to, because it's based upon units. So we don't look at them separately to answer your question. And we actually don't even request transcripts until you've been accepted and you're about to matriculate. So you have to enter them in AMCAS. AMCAS, you send your transcript to AMCAS, they verify everything, but where we can see where you went to community college and transferred, but there's no like separate GPA, like this is your community college GPA and this is your transfer GPA.
And then someone was wondering if it's going to count against them if they take a gap year to focus on studying for the MCAT and then also getting involved in community service or research.
Yeah, definitely not. Again, speak for me. I'll speak for me and UCDavis. We want you to bring something to medicine. And so you have to live a little to do that, right? It's nice if you've worked before, if you've had some experiences, if you've done some clinical work. It's really hard to do that in undergrad as a science major, right? Your schedule's really packed with surviving, studying, and trying to do well. It's completely fine if you take a year or 2 or 3, I don't call them gap years, I call them enrichment years. Just do something meaningful. What did you do during that time? What did you gain from it? And how is that going to make you an excellent physician? That's what I care about more than you coming directly in from undergrad with no lived experience. Like, no shade to people who are traditional students. Like, some people are able to fit all of that in while they're in undergrad, and great for them. But go back to what I said all the way at the beginning. You should apply when you're ready to apply. Be on your own path. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Be on your own path, because how you get there is going to be essential to your narrative in your story.
That's very good to hear. We also had a student who was wondering if you could speak to the process of how medical students choose their specialty. They'd heard that there were aptitude tests that they could take to help determine what type of field to specialize in. Is that actually the case, or what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I always tell people, number one, on the job is best, because I think there are, like, I certainly never said like, oh, I want to grow up and build doctors. I had to be exposed to what that is and say, wow, I actually really like this. Or I didn't say, oh, I want to be a community college counselor or work with students. That wasn't a thing for me until I got exposure to helping people figure out what they want to do. So number one, there is a program called Careers in Medicine. It's an online assessment test, if you will, interest test on AAMC's website. If you go to AAMC's website, Careers in Medicine. And it does give you an idea based on like what you like, but what you like today might not be what you like once you get to medical school and you've had exposure to some experiences. So we really recommend that for like first year medical students who are like exploring, maybe not for community college students, but it doesn't hurt if you're like trying to think of what you might like to do, but it just might be hard for you to really answer things authentically if you haven't had an exposure. Exposure is the key to all of this. So I think where people really figure out, because I'm telling you, a bunch of students, I have medical students come in like, I am surgery all day, surgery is my life. And then they get to the third year of medical school, right? There's only 4 years in medical school. They get to third year and they do peds and they're like, I love these kids. Like, I cannot see myself doing this up. Forget about cutting folks up. I just want to like work with the kids. So again, the exposure, the lifestyle, there's a lot of things that make a job good, like medicine or not, for somebody, but it depends on what are your values, what are the things you care about, what are your passions. And sometimes you just won't know until you get some exposure to that. And that's what medical school's for. So just get there. Don't be pressured to figure out what you're going to do once you get there. Just get there.
Dr. Green, can you tell them by what year and when they need to submit their residency applications and when they get to decide what they want to be? It's
Yeah.
not your first year.
It's absolutely not your first year. Like I said, people come in with a dream of being a neurosurgeon, and they're like, actually, I don't want to be in residency 8 years, but some people do, great. But you don't actually apply for residency until your 4th year of medical school. So it's after you've had your what we call core clerkship rotations. So there are like 6 clerkship rotations that gives you exposure to general specialties. And again, if you want to do like subspecialties, it's like you might have to do 2 different residencies or a residency and a fellowship. So again, you've selected a lifelong learning profession. You're going to be learning forever, and that's okay. But you definitely don't have to decide. And most people don't decide. And actually, even some people dually apply. They'll dually apply to residency. Like, I'm really struggling between emergency medicine and family. And so I'm going to apply to both programs and interview for both types of programs. And they do that. So again, you definitely don't have to decide. You really have until your 4th year when you're submitting that application to decide where you will apply to.
And then we have a question about, I've heard this myth a lot, that if you apply to any UC, but specifically they're asking about UCDavis for undergrad and graduate from UCDavis, is it harder to get into UCDavis's medical school?
No, I don't think it's harder. There's no advantage though. Like, we don't have a preference for UCDavis undergrad students. So it definitely doesn't give you any type of advantage. But it doesn't disadvantage you. Yeah, no, it doesn't give you either, is what I'm saying. It doesn't give you a disadvantage or an advantage. Because many people think the other way around. But no, it doesn't give you either, where you're looked at like any other applicant. And honestly, like I said, the only thing, the school doesn't really matter as much. The only thing is if you went to undergrad UCDavis, like, we might know the letter writer and like their credibility, but that's pretty much the only place that it would make like any like notable difference in someone's mind. Like, oh, well, we know this professor, they're reputable, but it's not going to help the rest of your package, right? If whatever your grades are, your experiences, if those are not strong, then it doesn't matter who wrote the letter.
And then we have a question. Do you think that community college students that eventually transfer are prepared for the vigorous pace of medical school?
Yeah, so I think that I wouldn't even say that that's a community college thing. I think once if you remember earlier on the presentation, I talked about having a strong foundation in science. I've seen people who come straight from undergrad campus all 4 years, UCLA or UC Berkeley or UCDavis, and they just didn't have a strong science foundation, period. Like, I don't think it matters if you came from community college or not. It matters, like, if you were strong in community college and working hard, that's going to translate once you transfer. So I think that it's really about, again, holistically, what your overall package looks like. Can you do medical school based on your performance, your academic coursework, and your MCAT?
And I think you touched on this earlier in your presentation, but sorry. One of our students was wondering, you said that grades aren't everything, but they were wondering if it's a red flag for admissions officers to see a drop in GPA after transferring.
So again, there's opportunities. So I don't know if it's a red flag, but it is, we're going to say what happened. Like, oh, this person was doing really well, or, this person was steady, and then they took a downturn. Then they are going to say what happened. So that's why I said, use your application to tell your story. Like, don't keep us guessing that we have to figure out what happened. Like I had a family member get really sick during this time, or I ended up being a caregiver for my younger siblings because something happened to my parents, or I transitioned to a 4-year university that it was a bit overwhelming. Like, I had to learn my resources and gather my bearings and take accountability, showcase what happened, and then show that you've trended back up. Let's just say that. So then we can say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like these are people who work in education, so we're not like unfamiliar with what happens in education settings, like once someone transferred, or we're not familiar with unexpected life situations, but don't make us wonder what happened. Just let us know what happened in a brief way that's accountable, but then explanatory, but then you showcase that you were able to like recoup from that, right? Because that's also translates to the clinical field. When something happens or you mess up, or in medical school, it shows that, okay, I was able to take feedback or showcase, I didn't do well, but now I went to access my resources, get help, and now I'm back on track. Like, we want to see that too, because medical school is really hard. You will not fail one time in medical school. Like, there's going to be some failure that happens in med school. And so it's actually like almost a positive thing that you can showcase you came back from a failure. Like, that is a positive thing.
Thank you. I think that's really encouraging for a lot of people to hear. We also had a question from a student who received their bachelor's degree in a science from a country that was other than the United States. And they're wondering if there's anything in particular that they need to focus on while applying to medical school in the United States.
Yeah, so number one, I think the schools that you're really interested in, or all the schools that you're applying to, you need to check the prereqs. So for us, you can have a foreign bachelor's degree, but your prereqs must be done at a US accredited school. So you just want to check to make sure that the schools you're applying to, because applications cost money, right? You just want to make sure that the schools that you're applying to are okay with that. And you can either look on MSAR, look on their website. MSAR is like a big database by the AAMC that has like everybody's requirements. You can look on MSAR, look on their website, or just email the school and say, hey, I have a foreign degree. If I do my prereqs here, is that acceptable? So you just want to just double check with the schools and confirm that they'll accept a foreign bachelor's degree.
How about advice for people that are non-traditional career changers, if doing a DIY post-bac at a CC, would it affect them versus an official post-bac at a four-year university, or the official ones that take a lot of money, a lot more money?
Yeah, great question. So again, my answer is always, it depends. So how long ago was your undergrad? What was it? What was the major? Did you do well? If you didn't do well, sometimes it's good that you're like far away from like the not so great grades. And then when you're going to attend community college for a DIY post-bac, right? You actually would want to take at least 3 science courses, right? Because again, science intense course. So if you want to showcase, I can take a bunch of science classes at the same time and do really well. So advice for anybody who's doing post-bac, DIY post-bac, formal post-bac, or a special master's program that is specifically a pre-health or pre-medical prep program, we are kind of expecting perfection. So 3.7 and up. If you're doing like post-grad work, especially if it's an academic enhancer, like you're making up for bad grades, or you're a career changer, because we look at post-bac like an Olympic qualifier. It's the show before the big show. It's like the closest thing to medical school that's not medical school, because again, it's science intense coursework. So you really want to do well. So that's why I said there's no right answer, because I always say it depends, because it's really challenging too. When you have an undergrad degree, for instance, and let's say you didn't do that well and you have a ton of units, like you have 199 units, it's really hard to move your GPA when you have a ton of units. So if maybe that undergrad degree was 7 years ago and now you're doing a DIY post-bac and you're taking 3 science classes for, let's say, 3 semesters, and you get straight A's, then that is your showcase to medical schools. You've got it. You can do this. You know how to study. You know how to apply yourself. You can take a bunch of like high unit, intense classes with labs and be successful. And then you'd want to have a strong MCAT score to tie the bow on the whole package.
Can you, Dr. Green, about the admission timeline, rolling admission, applying early, and then when do med schools accept students? Fall only, spring only?
Yeah. Woo, so med school application process is like a year thing. It's a year thing. So applications typically start opening May. So let's say you were applying, let's say you wanted to apply this upcoming May 2022. That would be to matriculate in the fall of 2023. So most medical schools start end of summer, fall. Most do. We don't have breaks and things like undergrad schools do. We have like random 1 week or 2 week or even 5 week breaks, but they're all over the place and they don't follow any like undergrad pattern. But let's say you were applying, the application season opens in May. We start receiving applications at the end of June. Some schools start sooner. We get to decide when we want to receive applications. And then we start sending out secondaries July 1st. We start interviews August. We do rolling admissions. So we typically, after you interview, you will find out if you got in or not, or if you got, so there's 3 options: in, wait list, or reject. In the old world, back before the pandemic, I would say that waitlist was not a bad thing. At UCDavis, as I mentioned, we get about over 7,000 apps, about 3,500, about half get secondaries, 500 people get interviews, right? That's really small number. 500 people get interviews, and we typically accept about usually around 200 folks, like maybe over anywhere between 180 and 220, depending on the year, to get a class of about 130-ish. So I used to say like being on the wait list is not that bad. I think we're getting back to that because a lot of times applicants would get multiple acceptances. So that would leave room for other people to get accepted. So really, if you got an interview, right? If we have 500 interviews and let's say we accept about 220-ish, like you almost have a 50% chance of getting in once you get an interview, right? I think that changed a little bit with the pandemic because the application went up. Like last year we had 10,000 applications. So that's a huge increase. This year we're actually closer to where we typically are. So we're at about 7,800 this cycle. So I think that's good because again, I think we're back to that. If you get on the wait list, that's not a bad thing. If you got an interview, right? Think about it. 500 folks out of 7,500. That's a huge accomplishment in itself. That means you did a good job on your application, number one. And then it's just a matter of kind of the waiting game. So we do interviews August to April. And we're actually one of the schools who do later interviews. Most schools don't interview all the way into April. So it gets tricky with the whole late apply thing. So I'll speak first for UCDavis, and I'll say for us, it's not our application, primary application is due October 1st, and that's fine for us. But I highly recommend you don't wait that long. For us, that's not a bad thing, but we're just one medical school, right? We have 132 spots, so like 1.7% of the entire applicant pool gets in, right? So I always tell people, if you would like to stay in California, you need to apply broadly, and you need to understand like what is included in that for you. So applying broadly, are you including DO schools? Like, is it MD only for you? DO schools are just fine. Like, are you okay with DO schools? Like, do your research. If you want to stay in California, you need to apply broadly, and waiting, like applying late probably would not be beneficial for you. You probably, I would say most people do apply like May, June. I would say July is like probably the latest if you're really serious about applying broadly. Most of the DOs don't mind, schools, I won't speak for all of them, but many of them don't mind a little bit later application, but it depends on where you're trying to be competitive at. I also highly recommend, if you're like, it's medicine and nothing else, I highly recommend you apply out of state. California gets a lot of medical school applicants, and we actually export a lot of medical school learners to other states. So I highly recommend you apply outside of California. And then at least you have choice. Like if you get into a California or other school, at least you have an option, right? But if you just don't get in, this application process is very expensive. And just going through all of that again and waiting another year may or may not be something you want to do. So I always tell people, put your name in the hat, because you can say no to something that's in your hands. But if you don't have it, you don't have any options. So be open, be broad, talk to your advisors about what's realistic for you and what you will be willing to do. And I give that same advice. There's not a lot of like BSN programs here in California too. I would say if you really want it, be ready to move out of state to make it happen.
We had one student who was wondering if it's a good idea to apply to medical school before they have all their prereqs done, because they've heard it's a good way to get your foot in the door and for people to hear your name.
Well, and when I have 7,800 applications, I don't think I hear anybody's name. It's a lot of pre-meds. So it depends. I always say it depends. Like, what kind of student are you? Are you like really sure? Like if you're a strong student, you get nothing but A's, then a lot of people, like for instance, traditional students, because they're applying while they're finishing undergrad, that's not uncommon. So you definitely can apply while you're finishing prereqs. You would just put pending coursework. That's not frowned upon. But again, we're going to be assessing the grades that are complete to assess if you can do medical school. So if you struggled a little bit and you're really needing those grades to boost your GPA or boost your overall portfolio, then I probably would recommend don't doing that. Unless you, again, you have a already strong academic record and you're like pretty sure like you're going to ace these current classes that you're in, and like the MCAT, you're done with the MCAT and it's no problem. So it depends.
And we also had a question. Someone was wondering if it'd be okay to major in a foreign language, that not including English.
Yeah, we've accepted students who majored in Spanish, Native American studies, French, all kind of different things. Sociology, like lots of non-science majors, but again, prerequisites, stellar, MCAT, showcasing you can do medical school. Can I add one more thing to that? Also, like talk about why you selected that. Like, why do you have a passion for that? How is that going to help you be a good physician? Like, make it make sense, tie it into your story and your narrative.
Can you talk a little bit about out-of-state students that want to come to UCDavis, and how does that work?
Yeah, so a couple different scenarios. So we do have out-of-state students, but the number, honestly, just full transparency, is pretty low. I would say less than 5 students a year come from out of state. We are starting to accept more students from Oregon and Washington, because we have actually a partnership with OHSU. We actually have a program that's focused on filling the physician shortage in Oregon and California specifically, and it's a partnership with WSU, Washington State University Medical School, OHSU Medical School, Oregon Health and Science University, and UCDavis. So we're starting to accept more students from those particular out-of-state areas. In general, again, we've had students come from out-of-state schools, but you really have to have that something special and unique because we are a California school. Many of the UC schools they have a higher number of out-of-state students. So I think look at the school's website and see if they accept, I would say 10% or more of out-of-state applicants, and I would go ahead and apply. But ours is typically a small number. It's like usually less than 5 folks. But again, we've had both international and out-of-state students because they were like really incredible. They had a unique story, or they really contributed something special to our medical school in our first year class. So just full transparency there that we do have a preference for California students or folks who have ties to California. Like you've spent a lot of your childhood here, or your grandmother's from here and still here, and you grew up in the Valley and then moved. And it's also okay, like you went away for college, but you're from California, things like that.
Is there a limit of science lab classes that you take online?
So again, even on our website prior to the pandemic, it said that we prefer in-person courses and labs, but it's not required. So it's again, what the proof's in the pudding. So what does your transcript say? Like, did you do well? And then how did that translate to the MCAT? So let's say you like aced all of your online courses and then you tanked your MCAT. Well, then that's letting us know you don't have command and knowledge of the content, right? So the question is, can you handle the rigor of medical school? How are you going to showcase that? So again, if you did well on the MCAT, like, right, let's say over like 500, 505 or something like that, and you had all online courses, especially in the pandemic, that's like all people have right now, right? Then again, no concern, like that's going to be just fine. It's going to say, oh, we're not worried about this person being able to do medical school. Now, like, are they a good person? Are they going to provide good patient care? Are they well-rounded? Do they have some attributes we're really interested in? Are they mission focused?
This is somebody's asking, I'm a non-traditional candidate working full-time and doing post-bac, but I'm only able to fit 1 or 2 classes each semester for full load of classes. Would this be looked upon unfavorably? Do you advise that I quit my job or reduce my hours in order to take full load of classes? I would just say this: if you need to put a roof over your head and food in your stomach, you don't have that option. I mean, that's most of the people.
Right. Yeah. I would never advise someone to quit their job, period. I would never advise someone to quit their job. Like, you need to do that to survive. You need to do that. Again, how is that part of your story? And again, my answer is always, it depends. Like, I need to see, what does the whole package look like? How far away was your undergrad? What did it look like? Were you a science major? Did you do poorly? and then you're taking classes one at a time, maybe that's okay if you like, kill the MCAT, like do a great job, like no one's going to be concerned. Again, your whole package. We're looking at everything holistically. So of course it would look better if you had more science intense coursework, because again, it's going to showcase you can do medicine. But if you're gaining the knowledge and you're able to do okay on the MCAT, and then you wanted to write that in your story, like I help support my family, or, I had a student who, came from Brazil by herself when she was 15 and had to figure everything out, including learning English, and talked about that in her essay and her interview. It was an incredible story. So again, the narrative, make it true to who you are, authentic and truthful. And that will carry you a long way. But you do have to showcase you can do the academic rigor. So that might be showcased with the MCAT, or let's say you're taking classes one at a time, but you're acing them. That's great. Now, it would be concerning if like you're still kind of struggling. And again, I don't know how far away those other grades are, or what they looked like. So it'd be challenging for me to give you like a straight answer, but that's my general advice.
And then I know we're coming up on 6:30, so this might be one of our last questions, but someone was wondering, how does an excused withdrawal affect your application?
Oh, if it's excused withdrawal, it doesn't, what we look at as excused withdrawal, like that could have been an illness, COVID related. I don't think that would count negatively against anyone, again, especially because I think the medical education community, we're looking for reasons we're being sensitive to the fact that students are going through struggles, particularly now during this time. So excuse withdrawal, we don't make assumptions about anything, because that could be someone's health or just other things. So I don't think that would affect you negatively at all.
This one, I may not understand it, but since the pandemic is not over, do you accept applications later in this pandemic?
Yeah, so last year we did more exceptions. This year we're still doing exceptions. So I think the latest we were accepting applications, because number one, we don't want to go too late, because then you won't have a fair shot at getting a secondary and an interview, right? Because everybody else is already kind of being looked at and you'll be the last to be looked at. But if people need an exception based on like, they have some type of documentation, like they were hospitalized or a family member was hospitalized, or I had an applicant who literally got stuck out of the country because of the pandemic. They tested positive for COVID and wasn't able, had to quarantine somewhere else for like 2 weeks before they could come back. And it was at the time they needed to submit their application. So I think even sometimes when you don't have documentation, like I'm always trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I think it varies by school. So it doesn't hurt me to give an extension if I feel like it's a valid, sincere reason. But I just worry because, again, this is an expensive process. So if you're applying super late, right, because our deadline is October 1st. If you're already applying super late, what type of odds do you have at our school or any school, right? Because now, like some schools are done interviewing in December, right? Like I said, we're a school that goes a lot later. So you really want to assess the investment that you're making in this and if it's going to be viable for you. And if you're not sure, talk to advisors and counselors about what you should do, because again, it might be better for you to wait to the following cycle when you can apply a little bit earlier. You don't feel as rushed, because then like if you apply late, you get a secondary immediately, like all those things are going to have to happen really fast. And you really need to get input from other people as well. So.
Dr. Green, can you just touch upon this about clinical experience? That doesn't mean you need to go become a nurse and to get the clinical experience or doing it other. Can you just touch on what clinical experience is and what they look for?
Yeah, and I always struggle sometimes with this one with students because they try to talk me into stuff when I know what I'm talking about because I work at a medical school. A lot of students that I work with in community college specifically, they tell me they want to go do their, like become an MA or an RN or an LVN first so they can get experience for medical school application. So I do a couple of things, right? At first I ask, like, is this about you really want the experience or you need money to help your family right now and you want it to be healthcare adjacent? Because really you're just making your road longer. The requirements are very different for these types of things. So I usually advise against that. What I tell people to do is things that are helpful is EMT, right? Typically EMT is a shorter training period. Phlebotomy is shorter training period. Scribe work is a very popular thing. And it helps you understand medical terminology. You get to be around physicians, you get to be in the clinical environment, even when it's virtual, you get to do it. Those are good adjacent clinical experiences. Shadowing is also really helpful. I would say make sure shadowing is not your only clinical experience, because that doesn't look so hot. But it is a good clinical experience, but you want to make sure you're doing something else that's more patient adjacent, patient transport, where you're in the clinical environment. And I think the reason for that, number one, is it helps you understand what the environment is like. We don't want you getting to medical school and that's the first time you've been in a hospital setting. Being in a hospital setting is very much a privilege. Like, you are literally in a place where people will expire and pass away. You are in a place where you will hear family members getting bad news. You're in a place where you will hear healthcare providers making challenging decisions with families and on behalf of patients. And so we want you to come in with that experience, that emotional intelligence, understanding what that space feels like, because that space is owed respect. And so we don't want you learning that for the first time when you come into medical school. And so that's the need and the reason why clinical experience is so important.
Yeah, and just to make a plug, we actually have 2 medical students that are going to do about a 2-hour presentation on clinical experience and all of these things in December. Make sure you're in our listserv, and we'll email you out about it. So you could get a whole host of various things and information about that. Anyone else have any other questions? Anyone?
I'm also happy to drop my email in the chat. So if you need just general advisement, you can definitely reach out to our admissions office. I do 15-minute phone appointments with PreMed. So if you do have questions that are like specific, unique things, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than willing to answer questions that might be a little bit more complicated or unique, because I understand everyone comes from, again, different path, different walk of life, and it can be challenging to kind of get what you need in a big group setting. So happy to chat with folks who might need to connect. So could be now, could be 3 years from now. So feel free to save it and utilize it. I'm not going anywhere. I love my job. I love what I do. And this is the best part of it. So I'll be there when you need me.
All right, well, it is a little bit past 6:30, and I think all the questions have been answered, but I just want to thank you again, Dr. Green, for your time. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else here did. And so, as always, all of our sessions are on YouTube, so they're recorded, so you can watch them later. But thank you again, Dr. Green. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye, everyone.